In the land of blazing suns, gunfire, and gold, death came not with a bang, but with a cough. When we think of the Old West, our minds leap to duels in dusty streets, runaway stagecoaches, and lone riders silhouetted against red sunsets. But beneath the surface of those romantic images was a brutal, slow-moving killer that claimed more lives than all the shootouts combined. Disease. For every outlaw that faced a hanging, 100 settlers, cowboys, and children died shivering, in fever-drenched beds. Entire towns vanished not from war or famine, but from infection. The truth is, the American frontier was not only a battleground of bullets and treaties, but of immune systems and exposure. Kevin Costner's The West doesn't flinch from this reality. His story dives into the quiet horror that stalked every wagon train, cabin, and reservation. In this world, tension didn't just rise with territorial disputes. It escalated with every ragged breath, every rising fever, every sealed coffin carried out under the moonlight. Imagine a family of 6, huddled in a log cabin during the winter of 1862. The father returns from town with supplies and, unknowingly, a virus. Within days, the youngest daughter starts coughing. By the end of the week, she's dead. The mother follows. The others are left to bury them in frozen ground. No doctors, no medicine, no hope. This wasn't just one family's fate. It was thousands. Outbreaks weren't always visible. The West was a land of isolation. Communities might not know another town was sick until a rider arrived too late to warn them. Already infected, already spreading. The silence made the disease more terrifying. Costner's narrative pulls this hidden plague into the spotlight. He portrays a frontier haunted by more than rustlers and raiders, haunted by the fragility of life in a place where medical help was days away, and death rode faster than the mail. They came with flags and guns, but the deadliest weapon they carried was invisible. Smallpox didn't arrive in the West with fanfare. It crept in quietly, smuggled in on clothing, on breath, on the skin of men who didn't even know they were contagious. But once it arrived, it consumed everything in its path. For the indigenous peoples of North America, smallpox was nothing short of apocalyptic. Imagine never having seen a disease like it before. No immunity, no medicine, no understanding. People watched in helpless terror as their loved ones were covered in sores, burned with fever, and died, sometimes within days. The 1837 outbreak, one of the most infamous, spread up the Missouri River when the steamboat St. Peter's docked carrying passengers from a cholera-stricken region. Officials had been warned of illness, but the journey continued. When the boat docked near Fort Union, smallpox began its silent slaughter. Within weeks, it had decimated the Mandan people, reducing their once thriving nation from nearly 2,000 individuals to just over 100 survivors. The loss was not just physical, it was spiritual, political, generational. Chiefs died with no one to take their place. Medicine men were gone. Oral histories, traditions, leadership, erased in a single season. Other tribes fared no better. The Blackfeet, Assiniboine, and Hidatsa saw their numbers decimated. In some cases, infected blankets were rumored to be traded to native populations knowingly, sparking historical debates about biological warfare. Whether intentional or due to indifference, the result was the same. Entire nations shattered, making resistance to U.S. expansion nearly impossible, and while the white settlers mourned their own, they also saw opportunity. As tribal lands emptied due to death, pioneers moved in. The very foundation of Western expansion, land grabs, gold rushes, railroad empires, was made possible in part because of the vacuum left behind by epidemic devastation. Kevin Costner's E. The West doesn't need to fictionalize this horror. It's already real. The show's characters, haunted by fever dreams and funerals, mirror those who actually lived through it. When a frontier town quarantines itself behind rifles and prayer, it's not dramatic license. It's historical truth. Smallpox wasn't just a disease in the American West. It was a force that reshaped destiny. And Kevin Costner's The West ensures we never forget that it was the unseen enemy, the invisible killer, that often decided who lived, who ruled, and who vanished. They feared bandits and buffalo. But the real killer rode the riverbanks. As pioneers pushed westward, in search of land, fortune, and freedom, they packed wagons with flour, rifles, and dreams. But what they couldn't pack and couldn't escape was cholera. Between 1849 and 1855, the Oregon Trail became the highway of hope and the graveyard of thousands. As many as 12,000 people died of cholera on the trail during just a few peak years, most of them buried in shallow, unmarked graves right beside the path they once saw as a road to paradise. Cholera didn't knock. It exploded. A person could go from healthy to dead in less than 24 hours. It started with vomiting and diarrhea, then severe dehydration, and finally death. By the time someone realized they were infected, it was often too late. Entire families were wiped out between one morning and the next. The disease spread through contaminated water, rivers, creeks, and even wells shared by passing wagons. One infected traveler could leave behind devastation for those who followed, even days later. The communal nature of the trail, shared meals, shared campsites, shared fear, became a perfect environment for the disease to thrive. Worse, there were no doctors, no hospitals, and no understanding. Some travelers believed cholera was caused by bad air or divine punishment. Remedies ranged from burnt onions and turpentine to prayer and bloodletting. Most were useless. Many were fatal. Kevin Costner's The West draws on this haunting reality. His characters might argue over land or cattle, but when cholera hits, those things no longer matter. A young girl collapses beside her wagon. A mother cradles her dead son while the river she drew water from trickles past, indifferent and unchanged. The pioneers didn't just fear death. They feared dying alone, unmarked, and forgotten in a vast and uncaring wilderness. Even as wagons kept moving, the memory of those left behind lingered. Crosses made of twigs, names scratched into bark, sometimes just a pile of stones. The Oregon Trail was soaked in sweat, blood, and sickness. And in Costner's The West, cholera is not just a background detail. It's a symbol of how the dream of westward expansion often came at the cost of unbearable human suffering. They came with muskets in hand, but were killed by what they couldn't see. In the American West, war and disease danced together, twisting the fate of soldiers, settlers, and indigenous fighters alike. In many cases, more men died from infection than from bullets. And while history remembers the battles, the Alamo, Little Bighorn, the siege of Vicksburg, it often forgets the camp fevers that claimed thousands silently. During the Mexican-American War, 1846-1848, more than 11,000 U.S. soldiers died, but only about 1,500 fell in combat. The rest were consumed by dysentery, typhoid fever, and measles, diseases that flourished in overcrowded, filthy camps where sanitation was a distant fantasy and medical knowledge was primitive at best. In the Indian Wars, indigenous warriors often fought through hunger and cold, but disease struck where the rifle could not. Smallpox and measles devastated tribes already under pressure, while soldiers stationed in remote outposts faced outbreaks with no supplies and no backup. One infected soldier could infect an entire garrison. And once sickness began, it didn't stop for treaties or truces. Camp hospitals were grim places, more likely to end life than save it. Surgery was done without anesthesia. Tools were rinsed in bloodied water. Infection spread as fast as fear. Often commanders prioritized battle readiness over health, sending feverish men into skirmishes where they died not from enemy fire, but from exhaustion and fever. Kevin Costner's The West captures this brutal reality with chilling clarity. A soldier looks at his comrade's trembling hands, then turns to the sound of drums in the distance. He knows he might die in battle, but he's more afraid of the cough echoing through the barracks. Disease blurred the lines of victory and defeat. Armies fell before they reached the battlefield. Settler militias returned home with fewer men, not because of raids, but because of infected wounds and fever. The unseen enemy, disease, became a character in its own right in the story of the West. It did not wear a uniform, carry a weapon, or fly a flag. It simply spread, struck, and vanished, leaving death in its wake. In the West, Costner's world is not only one of heroes and outlaws, but one where the strongest warriors fall to the quietest killers, and where fate isn't decided by the fastest draw but by the first cough. It came like a shadow across the sun, swift, silent, and unstoppable. Just as the American West was emerging into the modern world, with telegraphs buzzing and railroads humming across the plains, a new horror arrived, one more devastating than any Indian raid, any outlaw gang, or any winter storm. The 1918 influenza pandemic, known to history as the Spanish flu, swept through the United States like a firestorm. It killed more people in a single year than the Black Death did in a century. By the time it reached the western frontier, it found a region vulnerable, scattered, and unprepared. Remote mining towns in Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico were hit hard. Logging camps shut down overnight. Entire native reservations went silent. Some towns lost half their population in just a few weeks. In places like Gunnison, Colorado, desperate leaders enacted strict quarantines, blocking roads with armed guards and refusing outsiders, including mail carriers and doctors. But even isolation was no protection. A single visitor, a single handshake, a single breath could doom a family, a town, a way of life. Kevin Costner's The West uses this haunting history to show not just a physical illness, but an emotional epidemic. Fear, panic, suspicion. A mother, too scared to nurse her child. A mayor burning letters from the east. Churches shuttered. Coffins stacked in barns because the gravediggers were dead too. The pandemic turned the American dream into a nightmare. Cowboys wore bandanas not to fight dust, but to shield their lungs. Schools, saloons, and even brothels closed down as bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. And for the first time, the vastness of the frontier, the space that once promised freedom, became a trap. Help was days away. Medicine, if it came at all, was too late. In the West, the 1918 flu is more than background. It's a reckoning. It reminds us that the wildness of the West wasn't just found in its deserts or its shootouts. It lived in the fragility of the human body, the swiftness of loss, and the helplessness of those watching loved ones fade away with nothing to offer but prayer. They fought with arrows, rifles, and resolve, but no one could fight the fever. The story of the West is often framed as one of conquest, but the full truth is far more tragic. Native American nations didn't simply lose wars, they were systematically worn down by waves of disease that attacked not only their health, but their culture, unity, and future. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, indigenous peoples across the West were hit repeatedly by smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, and influenza, diseases brought by traders, missionaries, and soldiers. These illnesses didn't just kill, they crippled communities from within, hollowing out generations of leadership, destroying oral traditions, and breaking spiritual practices that depended on elders and rituals. Imagine Sitting Bull or Geronimo, not just facing military campaigns, but returning to camps where half the women and children had died in a single month. Imagine young warriors, ready to defend their land, falling to fever before ever reaching the battlefield. Resistance became harder, not because the people gave up, but because their very bodies were under siege. Some tribes believed the diseases were punishment from the gods. Others saw them as evidence of white man's magic, or worse, deliberate biological weapons. And in some cases, they weren't wrong. There are documented incidents, such as the infamous 1763 case at Fort Pitt, where smallpox-infected blankets were knowingly given to Native Americans. Even when resistance movements surged, like the ghost dance movement in the late 19th century, they were met not only with military repression, but by the cruel timing of new outbreaks. Disease didn't just weaken the body. It isolated survivors, fractured alliances, and left entire tribes voiceless. In the West, Kevin Costner captures this slow erosion with devastating beauty. A proud chief watches his people die off one by one, unable to protect them from an enemy they cannot see. A young warrior buries his family before ever raising a weapon. A medicine woman once revered loses faith as the herbs no longer heal and the drums no longer summon strength. The tragedy wasn't just that indigenous people were outgunned. It was that they were outlived by the diseases that came before the bullets, and perhaps most haunting of all, the silence that followed. Songs were forgotten. Dialects died with the last speaker. Resistance wasn't just defeated, it was unwritten by time and sickness. Costner's The West pays homage to these erased voices, not with speeches, but with empty chairs, abandoned camps, and the kind of grief that lingers in the land itself. Out here, hope came in a bottle, and sometimes so did death. On the American frontier, survival was a gamble, and nowhere was that more terrifying than in the realm of medicine. Far from the hospitals of Boston or Philadelphia, settlers and indigenous communities alike had to rely on whatever they could find. Remember, or believe. In the absence of trained doctors, charlatans and folk healers flourished. They came into town on wagons painted with promises. Guaranteed cure for all ailments. Snake oil restores vitality. The elixir of life. With smooth talk and slick hair, they sold dreams to desperate people, and often left corpses behind. Kevin Costner's The West doesn't shy away from this bitter truth. In one haunting scene, a grieving widow begs a traveling doctor for help as her son burns with fever. He hands her a tonic of whiskey, mercury, and powdered roots for a steep price. By morning, the boy is gone. But not all healing was fraud. Indigenous medicine women and herbalists possessed deep knowledge passed down for generations. They used willow bark for pain, sage and sweetgrass for purification, bearberry leaves for infection. Yet their treatments were often dismissed, or outright banned, by white settlers who labeled them witchcraft. This clash of belief systems created tension far beyond the sickbed. A settler might scoff at tribal remedies, until his wife's condition worsened, and the town's only doctor had ridden 100 miles away. Then, he would beg the same healer he once insulted, and even among white communities, folk medicine took many forms. Superstitions ruled. People buried knives under sickbeds to cut the fever. They hung onions from rafters to absorb illness. Bloodletting, blistering mustard poultices, treatments that often did more harm than the disease itself. Costner's The West masterfully reveals how the line between hope and exploitation was razor thin. In the frontier, medicine wasn't science, it was storytelling. And the story you believed might save your life, or end it. Sometimes, the silence in a small town was louder than any gunfire. The frontier was vast, expansive, free. But, during outbreaks, that same freedom became a cage. When disease crept into a settlement, panic followed close behind. In towns like Dodge City, Deadwood, and Helena, sickness didn't just kill bodies, it shattered trust. Neighbors turned on each other, doors were bolted shut, strangers were seen as threats. And the most terrifying part? There was no escape. In The West, Kevin Costner illustrates this chilling transformation. A once thriving town turns quiet. The church bell stops ringing. The schoolhouse is empty. A cough echoes down Main Street like a warning shot. People begin to whisper rumors. The blacksmith's wife is sick. The boy who fetched water from the creek has a fever. The saloon keeper won't come out of his room. In the face of disease, justice becomes survival. Quarantine lines are drawn by shotgun. A sick family might be locked inside their home, not for protection, but because the town is too afraid to let them out. Sometimes food is dropped on doorsteps like offerings. Sometimes not even that. For remote homesteads, isolation was even more brutal. A farm might sit 20 miles from the nearest neighbor. If someone fell ill, there were no doctors, no visitors, and no way to signal help. The family simply waited and watched, praying that the sickness wouldn't spread, and that someone would still be alive when spring came. Fear breeds desperation, and desperation births cruelty. In some towns, sick travelers were run out at gunpoint. In others, corpses were buried without ceremony, names lost, histories erased. And yet somehow, life went on, because it had to. In the West, Costner captures the emotional toll of that loneliness. A widow talks to her dead husband as she eats dinner alone. A preacher delivers sermons to an empty chapel. A child draws pictures in the dirt, unaware that he's the only one left on the farm. The American West was built on grit and independence, but in times of outbreak, that same independence became isolation, and the silence that followed was not peace. It was the sound of a community holding its breath, hoping the plague would pass them by. Sometimes the most dangerous character in the story never speaks a word. In the West, Kevin Costner paints a picture of a violent and unforgiving land, but not every threat rides a horse or carries a gun. Some of the most devastating moments in the series unfold not through battles, but through illness. Disease becomes a character in its own right. It enters quietly, reshapes destinies, exposes the cracks in every relationship. The tension doesn't come from a showdown, but from a mother clutching her child's burning hand, a marshal too sick to hold his badge, a preacher delivering final rites to a congregation that can't hear him anymore. In Costner's world, the outbreak is more than historical accuracy. It's a symbol, a narrative force, a metaphor for the unstoppable changes bearing down on the frontier. Just like the railroad, just like industry, just like war, disease changes everything. In one episode, a town facing illness fractures from the inside. The wealthy seal themselves off behind high walls. The poor beg for help and are turned away. A father chooses to abandon his family to save himself. A stranger risks his life to bring medicine from 200 miles away. Moral lines blur. Humanity is tested. And the real story isn't who dies, but who we become when death is near. Costner uses disease to slow the pace, forcing characters to confront time, grief, regret. The hardened gunslinger watches his wife die in silence. A young boy left orphaned becomes the symbol of a town's failure and its only chance at redemption. The outbreak isn't just a twist in the story, it's the crucible. And from it, new identities are forged, betrayals are revealed, love is tested, faith collapses and rises again. Through the lens of sickness, the West reminds us that even in a land of heroes and outlaws, the most powerful force is often the one we cannot see. The West wasn't just tamed by guns and grit, it was carved by fever. The American West is often remembered as a tale of pioneers and progress, of outlaws and opportunity. But beneath the legends lies a far more complex truth. The West was shaped as much by epidemics as by empires. Disease changed the map. Entire regions were abandoned after outbreaks. Gold rush towns like Bodie and Bannock saw their populations wiped out by waves of smallpox and tuberculosis. Indigenous territories were lost not in war, but in hospitals or homes where everyone had already died. It changed culture. Songs, stories, even languages vanished when elders passed away before passing them down. Medicines were forgotten. Rituals disappeared. The wisdom of generations lost in a single season. It changed families. Children were raised by strangers. Husbands buried wives in snow-covered graves. Survivors carried scars far deeper than any bullet wound. Scars of watching loved ones fade without being able to help. And perhaps most haunting of all, it changed how we remember. The stories we tell of the West often ignore the epidemics, but Kevin Costner's The West doesn't look away. It forces us to see the empty chairs, the shuttered windows, the dusty graves. The legacy of disease in the West isn't just in the history books, it's in the resilience of the people who remained, the nurse who stayed, the healer who kept trying, the orphan who grew up to lead. The West was a place of death, but also of survival. And those who endured carried with them a hard-earned truth, that in a world where everything can be lost overnight, the strongest weapon isn't a rifle or a horse, it's hope.